Well, I'm going to talk to you guys today about three books I've read, the only three books I've read so far this year, and they all follow a common theme. And so I thought it would be great, obviously, to talk about them together. We can look at it as a kind of what would be the right expression? I guess a triptych of trauma, maybe a trilogy of trauma, perhaps. Something like that. Well, we'll see as we go along. Maybe give your suggestions down below. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark. And of course, as usual, you may see Elvis wandering around in the background during the course of this video. So, what three books have I read? Well, okay, we're going to start off with, well, I might as well tell you about them all and then go into them one by one. So, Heart of Darkness was the first one. Of course, it's a classic novel of colonialism, European colonialism in Africa. The second book I read was King Leopold's Ghost, which is pretty much a history of the said colonialism in the Congo, of course, primarily by Belgium, and the atrocities that were committed there in the name of the king. And actually, probably it's wrong for me to say by Belgium, because for many years, from its founding up until the king's, or just before the king's death, the Congo Free State, as it was known, was actually the personal property of King Leopold of Belgium, King Leopold II of Belgium himself, rather than Belgium. But the atrocities are terrible. And the final one is In the Footsteps of Mr. Kurtz by Michaela Wrong, which kind of explores what came after the events in King Leopold's Ghost, the post-colonial atmosphere in what became Zaire, which of course no longer exists. And she looks at the dictatorship of Mobutu Sese Seko. And I want to talk about these three books and how they connect together in order to tell a really powerful and very often disturbing story of the Congo's past and present. Although, to be fair on that score as well, I guess it's not so much about the present, because the books are at least, in the case of the two non-fiction ones, are at least, I think, 20 years old anyway. So a lot of things have happened since then as well. But, whether you're into classic literature, history, or investigative journalism, I think all three of these books will give you a lot to think about. So let's start with the most famous one of all. And of course, that is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And this is a nice addition here from Alma Classics. It also includes his complete Congo diary, because of course Conrad did find himself in the Congo during the events and time that King Leopold's Ghost talks about. So the conquest of the earth, which mostly means the taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much. And that's a quote from the book there, which I think really sets the tone about colonialism being both hypocritical and, of course, extremely brutal. The novel follows a chap called Marlowe, who's a steamboat captain, as he journeys up the Congo River in search for the elusive Monsieur Kurtz, who we can mention in a little bit. But along the way of this journey to find Mr. Kurtz, he basically discovers and witnesses untold horrors, really, the horrors of imperialism, be it forced labor, slave labor, basically, diseases, and the destruction, complete destruction in some cases, of entire communities. The novel, though, is very complex, really, because people have mixed feelings about it. A lot of people look at it as pro-colonialist and racist, whereas at the time it was seen to be more as a critique of colonialism. And I see that more when I read it. I don't see it at all as glorifying colonialism. I think it's very much putting it down. But then when you come across African writers such as Chinua Achebe, they argue that it reduces Africans to just, mere shadows without either voice or agency. As we mentioned, the book does cover the horrors committed by King Leopold's agents within the Congo, and based off Conrad's real experiences. It ends with Mr. Kurtz uttering famous last words, I would say, which is the horror, the horror. And of course, these words are chilling, but we don't really know exactly what the horror is. Is it the savagery, in inverted commas, of Africa, as some people have suggested it is, or is it actually just the moral decay of those Europeans who have come over there to exploit it? Very much like in the case of the Second World War, where you saw ordinary Germans doing extraordinarily evil things. That kind of thing definitely went on whilst Conrad was there, and of course inspired him to write this book in the first place. And I think this is a big part as to why people still debate the meaning behind the Heart of Darkness today. So that's King Leopold. That's the Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And if it sounded a familiar tale to you, that's because, of course, it was made into a film in the 1970s called Apocalypse Now, where they substituted the horrors of the Congo for the horrors of the Vietnam War and changed things around slightly, but it's definitely based off this particular work. So the second book I don't own, I have it as an ebook. It is King Leopold's Ghost. For the first time in history, white men in Africa were collecting rubber by the thousands of tons, and they were doing it by holding the heads of African families hostage, by whippings and killings, and by cutting off hands. Yeah, this interesting quote from Hochschild, Adam Hochschild. He's the one who wrote King Leopold's Ghost. He actually goes in to say that the whole cutting off hands thing is a little bit maybe overplayed, and it was because you've probably seen photographs, black and white photographs of poor Africans having their limbs missing. Many instances, the limbs were not actually. I don't know. This doesn't make it any better. The limbs would have been taken off the dead rather than living people. King Leopold himself said, what kind of idiot would I have to be to chop the hands of people I need to work for me, right? It would be the last thing I'd cut off. So, he was definitely against it. It looks into the history behind, it puts the Heart of Darkness in context. I mean, it starts off with the explorer Stanley, of course, pegging out the territory that would become the Congo Free State. Also talks about Leopold II's, quest and thirst for his own colony and an empire for Belgium, which of course he gets, and it's much bigger than I think Great Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain combined, right? So, yeah, the book of course is non-fiction. It shows how King Leopold II turned the Congo into his private colony, as I mentioned, exploiting the people, firstly for ivory, and then after Dunlop came up with the pneumatic tire, then for rubber. He did it all under the guise of philanthropy, pretended it was all to do with anti-slavery movements and this kind of thing, and bringing, in inverted commas, civilization to the wild parts and unknown parts of Africa. It's estimated at least 10 million people probably died. The problem is they don't know the exact starting point of the Congo population in the start, but estimates put it at around 20 million. So that means with half the population known to have been killed. Not, again, doesn't make it any better, not wiped out by colonial forces completely by them, but the colonial forces created situations that allowed disease and other things to, hasten the wiping out of 10 million Congolese. Hochschild does go on to reveal, of course, Conrad's visit to the Congo in the 1890s when he was working for a Belgian trading company, and of course he saw firsthand the cruelty and violence that obviously inspired the novella of Heart of Darkness. Going the horrible things. I mean, one of the things I remember reading was a man, a Belgian official. He had all the trees cleared around his house, and would take pot shots at the Africans as they walked past. In a scene very, very reminiscent to me of Schindler's List, where Eamon Roth does this as well. The character played by Ray Fiennes does this. He also had 12 women beheaded because they were supposed to clean his courtyard, and when he went out to inspect it, he found one leaf. So, these people are mad, obviously, descending into madness, and it's not even an isolated case. There was loads of similar cases of brutality that went on with these colonial officials. One of them being, of course, the cutting of hands, which I've already mentioned. The reason why it was done is because all the soldiers in the Force Publique had to account for every bullet they used. So when they killed locals, they needed to bring back evidence of the killings. So they brought back hands as well as other body parts on occasion as well, just to show they weren't wasting their bullets. So yeah, it's a very shocking book. It does also go on to the remarkable fight to expose the horrible goings on within the Congo. A fight led by Sir Roger Casement is one of them. Unfortunately, the name of the second chap, who's also very important, escapes me at the moment. But they were really amazing people, very, very similar to those who fought for the abolition of slavery at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th centuries in Britain. And the final book that I read, again also as an ebook, which hopefully will appear above here, is a book called In the Footsteps of Mr. Kurtz, and it was written by Michaela Wrong. Zaire was a country where the state had crumbled so thoroughly that it lived off its citizens instead of serving them. So it kind of picks up very nicely where King Leopold's Ghost ends. It's what happened after colonial rule ended. Now, Adam Hochschild does cover some of this at the end of his book, of course, but this goes into more detail. And Michaela Wrong herself is a journalist and specializing in Africa, of course, and I think she writes extremely well. So she explores the end of colonialism. She explores the death, of course, of Patrice Lumumba, who was the first post-colonial leader of the Congo, who, when he turned towards the Soviet Union instead of the West, found himself the victim of allegedly CIA plot to have him wiped out. And he was, of course, sadly, brutally murdered and replaced by one of his former comrades, President Mobutu Sese Seko, or I think he was born Joseph Desiree Mobutu, and he ruled Zaire, which of course now no longer exists. They basically founded this country as Zaire out of the remnants of the old colonial Congo Free State. Now Zaire is the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he ruled it for over 30 years with a fairly iron fist. Wasn't a particularly pleasant man, but he was for many years supported by Western powers as an ally in the Cold War, of course. And he basically ran the country as a personal empire. It's very similar to King Leopold, to be honest. He freely helped himself to money that should have been put to other uses within the country. He built very lavish palaces while his people suffered in poverty and disease and all sorts of things. Corruption was rife like you wouldn't believe. Oh my goodness, some of the statistics were absolutely shocking. But yeah, his entire rule was filled with this corruption, of course, propaganda, paranoia to some degree, which again is very reminiscent of what happens to Mr. Kurtz in the Heart of Darkness, or in Heart of Darkness by Conrad. There is quite a striking moment in the book when Mobutu tells the population of Zaire that, as his power is slipping, that he tells them they're going to have to tighten their belts, while at the same time he's having luxury items like champagne by the crate load flown in daily from Paris and this kind of thing. It's unbelievable. But I think what Wrong's book does is really make it clear that even after independence, the Congo or Zaire or Democratic Republic of Congo, as it is now, as I've said, was really still haunted by the attitudes that were prevalent during its colonialization, and it was really much open to exploitation from its own leaders, but of course as well from other countries who wanted to make use of the vast wealth, mineral wealth and things that you could find within that country. And I think that's its curse. It could very easily be a very wealthy, stable and secure country, but of course it's cursed to have pretty much all the major resources that the modern world needs, and that's led to a very, very troubled period throughout the last 20 years, even after Mobutu left. So, things are still not rosy there. I think it's pretty much the worst war in African history and one of the worst wars in global history in terms of, the number of people who ended up being killed in the wars related to the fall of Mobutu and whatnot. So in conclusion, I would say reading all three of these books together is a very, very powerful experience where Heart of Darkness shows, both psychological as well as moral decay that imperialism caused. King Leopold's Ghost reveals all the brutality and things behind it, and the basically gives you the whole story, which is good. And finally, In the Footsteps of Mr. Kurtz proves that colonization really didn't end when the Europeans left. It just took on a different form, almost like an intra-colonization, so to speak. And then, of course, economic colonization as well, that we see in the present with what European and Asian countries do in Africa. One of the questions that kept coming back to me whilst reading these books and thinking of Heart of Darkness is, what is it? Is it Africa itself? Which, of course, some people argue it is. Others believe that it could be the greed, the power, the cruelty of imperialism, and that moral decay that is the Heart of Darkness. And I'd really be interested to know what you think it might be, if you've read any of these, or even if you just think off the top of your head what you think that Heart of Darkness might be. And I would like to also point out that I came to reading these through listening to one of my favorite podcasts, which is The Rest is History. And they recently did a fantastic series on the Congo, and they took Adam Hochschild's book, King Leopold's Ghost, as very much the core text for their series. They also did a separate episode at the end of the series on Joseph Conrad and Heart of Darkness, which are well worth your listening to. So there we have it. Those are the three books that I have finished this year, and I commend them to you. They are worth it. I mean, altogether they can be taken as a corker of a reading experience, albeit a very brutal, traumatic and very sad one, but still I think it's not a reason to shy away from it, and it's I feel better for knowing, for having read them, if that makes sense. So there we have it. Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, do take care, everybody, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye.